today, we've got timeshare and Bill and Kirby could show up, which is really nice. Emily Byrne is not gonna be back with the sick child tomorrow. So they have been moved to next week. So tomorrow, all we have is the security briefing. We should be able to go out of here early, which is probably not bad on Friday.
Already had this committee, the other committee.
Yes, that's right.
Can we convene at one rather than at two? Really get.
You won't show up to one. And then we've got one bill, but the city manager is out of town until next Friday, so I can't even do the one bill I've got, and I'm chasing down the tip bill from Barry. That's the Hartford, tip extension, and their manager is out.
Yeah,
That's today?
No, we can't get their manager till next, well, he's not back till next Friday, so it'll be the week after. Next week, NCOIL has asked to come speak to you all. But I will let them come in. It's interesting. I made it. Okay, so we are live. First important thing. Senator Chittenden has volunteered to bring in a refrigerator if anyone thinks that would be helpful. Think about it and let me know.
Okay.
One with the question, espresso machine.
I offered a cure.
He offered a cure, but if you want to bring in an espresso machine,
One tonight.
there will be backlash, I'm sure. But
Will it be filled?
I do like to keep things around.
he does like snacks. I think we are figuring
Philly
that out.
ball.
Something about nectarines and plums in the refrigerator. People that bring in their lunch, that is.
Yeah, they had to keep his soda machine filled.
He's building up a list of people who owe him favors.
Okay, see, we get time and go through it.
Thank you, Tom.
So today, Jill and Kirby Keaton are here, and timeshare properties, yes. And maybe while you're here, we'll talk about a few other things, but for those who are new to this, last year, we took a lot of testimony about how to value timeshares. It seems that slugs came up, but the village, I believe, of Cambridge or town lost millions of dollars in grand list because there is right now no market for timeshares. If you go to market your 2 weeks in February, you're getting nothing for it, even though you have a very nice condo, you only have it for 2 weeks. And apparently there was at least one lawyer going around the state and initiating suits or appeals to have those valuations knocked down. And it was, on the other hand, there was a new form of resort where you can buy points and you can use the points to stay at their different resorts, and they were buying up a lot of it, but we were in transition, and the question from the listers, at least up in the Lamoille County area, is how do you value these on market, which is what the appeal or the lawsuit was. It's basically nothing. And so what they did is they valued it the same as they would the condominium next door, which is the same building. And that's what they lost. And I think it was 1.5 million, they lost a lot. For
Well,
small.
it's also the issue that they had these condominiums that were effectively worthless, but for all intents and purposes, they were renting them out as vacation property to outsiders at market value.
Right.
So there was clearly a value to these condos. It wasn't being collected by the tax authorities.
So we asked property valuation. Last year, the decision was, it seemed to be in transition and it would seem to be in the process of straightening itself out as other. And what is the name of that's buying them up? But it's like a national, I know I babysat for my grandkids, so my daughter and her husband could have a week at a resort in New Hampshire to get pitched on this thing.
Witness protection program.
It is like that, yes. But you buy so many points to start out with, and then you can use those points to stay somewhere, and you get other points for staying there, and you get more points. Okay, it's a point system. And they had been buying up a fair number of these timeshares, so at least that's what was reported to us, so.
My question, usually you save the questions till after the presentation, but
You're new.
I need to know the context here, but
All property gets taxed one way or another.
Right, but generally, for residential property, it is taxed on market value based on recent sales. The recent sales for timeshares were 1/10 of what they paid for them.
this property might be owned by 52 different people, because each
Right. each
owner had only a week.
Yeah. Does each owner get a tax bill, or is there some
It
manager?
goes to the management and then it got divvied up. But anyway, let's let property,
Yeah, okay.
it was confusing at best. But some very upset homeowners.
And then it got more confusing.
Then it got, because their tax bills had gone up and gone down, and if they went back to the old ways, their tax bills would have gone way up. Even though they couldn't sell it, and they could only use it 1 week a year. So,
Okay,
okay, now you can straighten out everything I just said.
I'm gonna try. So I'm Kirby Keaton. I'm a policy analyst with the Department of Taxes. I do general legal work and legal research, and wrote this report for you. I work with PBR quite a bit. Like Jill and I are here together. I think you all know what a timeshare is, but there's just some preliminary like jargon I just want to define before getting into it. And that's timeshare estates. So when you purchase a week, a year at a place, you're getting some rights that you're purchasing. And so that thing you're purchasing is called a timeshare estate. Okay. And then, not to get too far ahead, but the valuation is done on the timeshare estates. And then you add up for a unit all those timeshare estates and what their values are. And that's supposed to be the value for the unit. That's the typical way of doing it. So in Vermont, that's what we do for the most part. There's nothing in statute laying out a formula or anything, but that's really normal for property valuation. There's just a few exceptions to areas where we have a statutory formula for property valuation. And in those cases, it's stuff like renewable energy generation, where that formula is going to most likely land below fair market value. But for most of what we do is the statute requires assessing officials to determine the fair market value, and then they apply their professional expertise and figure that out. So as I was just saying, the norm, the professional best practice is to take those timeshare estates, you do a market study at other units and the timeshare estates that were sold at similar units. From my understanding, I think it's usually within, or it's often anyway, within the same property. And you look at the recent sales, and I think this is one of the things that Senator Cummings was referring to before, where if all the recent sales were really low, then you're going to have a lower valuation than before. And, that's going to be the market in decline. We don't often run into markets in decline and property valuation. Usually, real estate increases in value over time. So I've actually been around long enough to remember after Irene, there was a real estate in decline moment. And I think there was a lot of meetings here about that. But those things tend to go back up, right? So that's how we determine fair market value in Vermont. The statute's not clear about it, but the best practices are followed. So in the report, we were asked to look at other states. Most other states, from what I could find, also don't have statutory formulas. They follow fair market value. And then across the country, the system that I explained a minute ago with the doing a market study of each timeshare state and adding that together is the norm. In places like Florida, it isn't statute, but they use that formula. In Arizona, they do that, and Arizona has a whole lot of law about timeshares, and there's a 29-page guidebook that the Department of Revenue puts out there about valuing timeshares. But essentially, it's like what we do here normally, which is adding up the values of the timeshare states and doing a market study. States like Maine and California don't have a lot of law about it, but there's some guidance about what can and can't be considered in those states, similar to what happens in Vermont. The regulations of California, for instance, make assessing officials take into account that these timeshare estates are sold in increments of time. They require that they factor in seasonal use to get the value right. But it's still a market study approach, and the regulations just offer some guidance for that. Maine is similar in that the statute just calls out a few things that have to be considered along the same lines. Utah statute has some things that can't be considered when doing these market studies. From what I can tell, looking at the Utah law, I think what we're doing in Vermont would probably comply for the most part in Utah. And then there's South Carolina, which is the outlier. It's different. South Carolina is valued in like condos, basically. You can't take the timeshare estates into account. You have to look at the unit and value it like a unit on the market, which basically makes it like a condo. So that's kind of the lay of the land from what I could find.
That's a good question. When South Carolina values it like a condo, in terms of, is there then an assessment to the individual time owners of that timeshare for the taxes? How do they collect it, in other words?
I believe that usually the managing entity, there's always a managing entity with the timeshares that has to take care of the common areas and collect fees and all that. It's usually, and that's how it is in Vermont, the managing entity is on the grant list and responsible for collecting tax. And I think that South Carolina follows the same kind of approach, except in South Carolina, each timeshare owner is going to owe a fraction of the tax for the unit. When they go to value the unit, they have to look at it like a condo. But then each of those individual owners will still have to, pay their share of tax. So
And that's
I don't
what
think it's
they
vastly
were
different.
Do
doing.
they pay it to the state, individual owners of the state, or is the managing entity responsible for payments to the state? I'm just wondering how they collect it. Because what's happened is that people abandon these condo units or these timeshare units because they can't use them and they sort of walk away. And then the question is, who's responsible for the tax at that point?
I can't say for certain. I think it's the managing entity because that's the norm, and I don't recall South Carolina being different.
Whose name is on the deed?
That's a great question, and that gets into how messy it can be with these timeshare estates, because even though that's the term we use, each one can be totally different. Sometimes if you're buying a week a year, you are essentially a deed owner buying 1/52nd of the deed. Other times, the way the contract's drawn up, you're basically leasing it and you don't have an ownership interest. And then there's all sorts of variations other than that. So there's not a set way. And it does go to, I think it's one thing I like about their modern approach that we say it's determined fair market value, because there is a difference in value between whether you get to be a deed owner or not. And right now, our assessing officials can take that into account. That if you're essentially just leasing, then that might mean that the ownership for that unit is lower.
Something very much like timeshare, when you have recreational property, getaway property that is passed down from generation to generation. So now you got 16 great grandchildren.
And they're all getting.
Okay, and they all get it. We had something like that.
But
Well,
that's.
it was in my grandfather's name. Like,
Right.
it's still my grand.
Yeah, there's a name on the deed. This one, and there were some towns that valued it differently and were not seeing the big decline when there was an appeal. And we did do some things, I believe, last year, Jill, so that the town wasn't disincentivized. Because if the town didn't win, if it didn't win the appeal, it had to rebate all the taxes to the owners if they did a new appeal. And we did something with that. But there still was a question, because I believe at least the lister that was here, and it was Smuggler's Notch, was valuing it like a condo. It is a building. It has X units, it has X bathrooms and bedrooms and walls and amenities. And then dividing it up, which came to a much higher value than if you just looked at the recent market sales, where there were a significant number of people just walking away. They paid for them. They didn't have a mortgage on them, but they were being charged for the maintenance, upkeep, their, right to use the swimming pool and maybe a discount on ski lifts. And it was costing them money, so they just walked away. And the folks that were trying to sell theirs, the market value, like $2,000 stuck in my head, where they probably paid $200,000 for it when they bought it, or somewhere, up in, up much higher than $2,000. And so, and the listers were very upset because, the rest of the town was going to have to make up that loss of revenue from these out-of-towners who come here and stay for a week, but use our fire, police, ambulance, and all the rest of it. So we tried to make it easier for the towns to appeal an assessment or a loss. And we tried, and then the question was, well, what do other states do? But it sounds like other states are kind of doing, they're doing a market. I'm sure that market values maybe in Arizona, they just have a lot more timeshares than we do.
When if I were to book a place in another state, say somebody comes here, books for 2 weeks at a resort, they're going to pay the room, meals, and lodging estate tax 9%. Do these, which often carry annual fees and so on, do they pay that 9% in any way?
It's all going to depend on the arrangement, how it's set up. Just the way the taxes work, though, if you're buying a timeshare, if you're buying a timeshare estate, then you're buying ownership, like a right to be there, like a house. And then it goes to property taxes that you owe. It's not going to go to meals and rooms. But this point system thing, I haven't personally encountered that, so I'm going off the cuff here. But if it's a point system where you can buy these points and then go to resorts in different places, that sounds more like
I
meals
think
and
it
rooms.
is, and I'm still trying to remember, it was one of those names like Manchester that shows up a lot. But
As a follow-up, I dragged my lovely spouse to probably about 7 of these. We've never bought though. We just like to take advantage of the deal. And many of them are very much run like hotels.
Yes.
It seems to me that they should pay that room use
yes,
tax.
I'm sure they do. And yeah, that's what my daughter, we got a 3 weekend on a lake in New Hampshire. It was pretty good.
I have a driven well, but my property originally did not, and they got well water from a neighbor's well. And it was actually a right of way on that. That neighbor came to me and he was selling, that I had like gone through a legal procedure
Oh, yes.
to give away my right of way over his land. Because the fact that there was any encumbrance at all undermined his ownership of his property. Okay, and I remember it explained to me that property ownership is not as simple as people think, that what you own is a collection of rights pertinent to a parcel of land. And there are different arrangements.
Mhm.
Do you own, how deep down do you own the coal? How high up do you own the air and so on?
Who owns the land over the food scheme?
But apparently you didn't own that easement because he took it from you when he sold it, right?
No, I agreed that,
You just agreed to let it go?
yeah, because he wanted to sell it and the buyer couldn't buy it because it had an encumbrance.
Probably. the
So,
title insurance.
So I threw away, and I didn't want it, I've
Banks
since
do
got.
not- do not understand shared wells, shared driveways or roads. I mean, we have a private road and there's 3 houses on it. And while the guy that built the houses lives at the end, he plows it, and non-Vermont banks get really
It's a
stressed.
good deal for yourself.
Yes.
But anyway, what I'm
They
getting
don't
at,
understand.
I'm surprised that this problem exists at all. It would seem to me that whatever the arrangement, it ought to be clear who owns what. I can't believe you have one piece of property with several separate deeds. There must be one
It's
deed.
one deed, you're just buying a, like how the easement thing works, where, you know, there's a bundle of rights of property, you're owning a portion of the rights. When you are actually partially a deed owner.
And you also get certain rights to use amenities in the resort. You might,
You have stronger legal rights, basically. If you agree to a lease situation, then you're not gonna have the same kind of rights.
But does each person have their own deed? And what is it actually a deed to?
The managing entity is gonna be holding the deed, yeah.
So why don't we just tax the managing,
That's what we
let them take it out?
right, no, it's
that's what
not
we
who we tax. It's not,
Yeah.
that's not
It's just,
the
it's
issue.
just how we value it.
It's how you value it. What
Yeah, yeah,
is
a whole bunch of
that
things
one
that-
week in that condo? And it's a condo. What is that 1 week in that condo worth? And if you look at the resale value, recently, it's worth almost nothing. It's worth nothing close to what you paid for it.
But are you taxing the week? I thought you were taxing the whole property.
But each person that owns a week, some of them own a month, some of them own 3 weeks. Each person gets taxed a portion of the value. The question was, is the value the building? Or because the building doesn't get sold, your right to live in that building for a block of time is getting sold. And if you can't resell that block of time for anything, standard practice is then the resale value is nothing. Therefore, you owe nothing. And the town had been valuing it as a 3-bedroom, 2-bath condo with amenities. And the appeal, and their word was, there was one lawyer who went through the state and did this in several ski towns, that the appeal said, no, you can't value that. You have to value it on, the standard is resale value. And the courts, so that whatever they went to, agreed. If the town grieved that and went to the next level of appeal and lost, then the town had to repay all the taxes it had over collected. So they didn't appeal, but they lost millions of dollars in revenue. Your puzzlement is why we punted.
But I'm not, it seems to me that it's simpler than that, that you tax the management company for the full value of the property, and the management company works it out.
But the
with
question is,
timeshares.
what is the full value of the property?
Well, then you look at comparables,
That's it, and the comparables were zilch.
because there are no comparables that were being used anyway other than timeshare.
No, there were no time, the comparable is another time.
Comparable.
Yeah,
Well, no, that's what I'm questioning, I thought you look for comparable of the
The
property.
town did a evaluation of the building just as a building, a condo. They went to court, or they were taken to court, they lost.
so again, so the best practice, and it's what the district advisors, the PBR, are going to advise assessing officials to do, is to determine the value. You do comparables, so those are unit, you look at it by per unit, right?
Yeah.
And each of the blocks of time, those are the timeshare estates, you look at comparable sales of those blocks. And if those blocks are, yes, if the market had cooled off and those are selling for less than they used to be, then your market study would say that the value could decrease for that unit.
Definition, blocks of time or blocks of bricks and mortar.
Blocks of time.
Yeah.
You're,
Saying-
that's the normal practice for valuing the timeshares. It's not like a condo. You're looking at the blocks of time and what they're worth, because the goal is fair market value. And that's what these things are selling for. That's their market value. It's not what would it be worth as a condo, because it's not a condo.
And this has already been adjudicated.
Oh, yeah, there's Supreme Court cases, there's a recent one that there's, the Vermont Supreme Court has made clear that the sales comparison approach we're talking about is the preferred way. But
The fact that I think it's crazy.
Means you understand.
The matter is.
Now you
they
understand.
would probably be undervalued if you looked at them like condos. Managing entity is going to make more off of selling them as timeshares than condos usually. And the managing entity also, they incur costs, they have to offer amenities, there's more contractual transaction costs, so they're worth more.
But in the current situation, they're not selling.
Right.
And there was nothing, nobody's offering to buy them. At least that certainly was the whole issue. And this seems to be the issue with timeshares generally, not just those at Smuggler's Notch. That as an industry, it doesn't seem to be going particularly well.
It's not.
So I guess,
Play along.
well, what kind of tax do they pay when they purchase into a timeshare?
You're buying it's seen as buying an ownership interest.
But is that taxed? Shouldn't that be taxed?
You're responsible for a portion of a property tax.
But I think maybe we just
Property
tax
transfer.
that transaction.
What's happening is that timeshares are no longer in vogue. These other groups, whence they were valued at nothing, this other group is coming in and buying them up.
Yeah.
But it gets into, well, I'm here, one of my neighbors doesn't want to sell, and one's just walked away from it. And you have to get you have to get the whole building or something to agree. So it's in transition. I would say within 5 years, these new kinds of point-based resorts will own them. They will be property taxed as a hotel, a resort, something. And at that point, once it's a business, it may go to a profit, income-based evaluation.
So even if they do that, if someone's buying into I just feel like I'm confused as if there are transactions that are being made that are not taxed, and if we could tax those to recoup the reality of
Okay,
like.
I
that
would
these are kind of
assume
magic.
we collect the transfer tax and it's the town that's lost the property tax. So you got different ones. I would assume, and maybe you could check it, that you would pay a property transfer tax somewhere in there.
Property transfer tax applies to deed transfers, which this wouldn't be, because
This
the
isn't
deed is
deed.
being held by a managing entity. And then there's the change that we made recently about controlling interests.
Oh,
And
okay.
And
Would
just
that do it?
totally off the cuff, I don't think one individual person buying a portion of a
Is a
timeshare
controlling
is
interest.
gonna fall into the controlling interest.
Okay, that might be something to look at. But again, I don't think there are any timeshares being sold right now. The buildings are being picked up.
However, that transaction is happening, we're not taxing it.
Oh, yeah, no, we can check.
Having suffered through a few of these, sorry, I shouldn't say that, I don't mean to slight the industry, but there are two transactions. One, the big check you write when you purchase it, and then there are very sizable maintenance fees. And
Yes.
those maintenance fees, to me, really should be paying the rooms and meals tax, because you pay them in order to come to Vermont and stay here in effectively a hotel for a period of time. So I'm wondering if those maintenance fees are taxed in any ways. They should be.
Jill's taking notes.
We can't get rid of
So some of the other states have statutes that specify whether those fees should be included or not. Some of them exclude them on purpose. Because it's something other than property interest, something other than fair market
Yeah.
value. So that's really all I can say.
The charges that you, as an owner of a second home, would pay for people to maintain that second home while you're away.
And they clean it and
You will have
they,
5,100
yeah. They clean it, they maintain it, they paint the walls, they change out the carpeting. But as they say, but I don't own the furniture, it's not mine, but they replace it on a regular basis, they.
Airbnb.
Yeah. But anyway,
Is this not actually a property tax at all? We're not taxing property, we're taxing,
no,
we're taxing a service, we're taxing a set of privileges pertinent to a piece of property, but we're not actually taxing the property.
no, we're taxing, well, see, that's it, we're set up as a property tax. And if you're renting a room or meals, but you're buying, so, yeah, it's not set
It's
up in a
tricky.
lease, so, yeah, it's
Yeah.
tricky, and I'm sure
something
they
not right.
have very good lawyers who set this up before we even thought about it.
The
To
word-
their advantage.
The word misnomer gets misused so often these days, it's almost lost its meaning. I think this is a misnomer, and misnomers are easily fixed. You cross it out and you put in another word.
Okay, except that there aren't many left, and so
Last year.
we go through, you know, we're way behind the 8 ball on this one. This, 20 years ago, when timeshares were a hot commodity, we probably would have made some money. This year,
Well, what I worry about is this is a new scheme that probably 20 years from now we'll look back and say, wow, they really like circumvented a lot of our, our infrastructure and tax systems. And is this at some point maybe a tax issue, but also a consumer protection,
maybe, yeah.
issue for how these new point systems work? And is somebody
Well,
making
we
money
can
from
have
that?
somebody come in.
At their core, they're
Windwood,
temporary
wind,
stays.
wall, wind something, I think.
I did not pay a property tax on my right of way across my neighbor's property. I had a right,
Yeah,
a legal right,
yeah,
pertinent to someone else's
to get your
property,
water off.
but I did not pay a property tax on it.
No,
It probably should have affected value, I would think.
yeah, it would have been, yeah,
Of each of the properties.
yeah, your house would have been worth a lot less if you
Without
didn't have
water.
water. Trust me, I sold the house that had a hose that ran from their friend's house across the lot, and that's how they got their water. They only used it a couple weeks of the year. The friends sold, they wanted to sell. Can't sell when your water supply is a hose running from a stranger's kitchen faucet or outdoor faucet.
That's why I have a different one.
Yeah, well, we had to get a driven well, and then there was an easement for something across the street where you, oh yeah, it got very complicated. And septic is worse. Septic easements. So, yeah, so anyway, what you found out is there's no magic bullet out there. And if we're gonna go forward, we probably should just look at the taxing structure that's set up for these new. They essentially, yeah, they use a point system, but you could use it at any one of their estates anywhere in the country and the world. And just make sure we're taxing them correctly. I'd be surprised if we aren't, but.
To Senator McCormick's point, I just hope that when those points, wherever they're purchased in the world, if they're used in Vermont, they should be paying the rooms and meals tax.
I
percent.
Well, that's what, yeah, I think that's what we want to make sure is how those are done. Because it's a lot easier to set it up correctly in the first place than to be where we are 20 years late saying, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't have done it that way. But we did it the way we do everything, which the courts have upheld, which is market value. It's just suddenly the market value went away.
But
It's
the
like
market
having a
value of
baby.
what? It's, again, you're talking about the market value of the right to use it 2 months a
Okay,
year.
but it's-
I'm talking about the market value of the property.
Yeah, but there's a that's what the courts have said.
So the market value is
You're
based on
the
highest-
American constitutional.
Well, I'll tell you that if the court said that, there's always a way around it. That's what lawyers are for.
Okay.
So it's in
Yes,
the property
rest assured,
value
they have
based upon
more
its usage.
expensive lawyers than we do, and they
It's
have.
highest
Market
and best
value.
use, so if there's a more valuable use other than a timeshare, then assessing official could take that into account.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, that's effectively what these companies are doing.
Some towns did it differently and did not get hit. I mean, it was there were a couple of towns that did that full condo thing. Stowe didn't get hit because they valued them differently. I don't know how, but that was the testimony in here before I inherited Stowe.
I think it would be interesting to try to understand that better.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll have Stowe in then and ask how they did it.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
So let's just say you've had a house in Vermont that 6 different people owned. Someone's like, can you still reasonably say one person's responsible for paying the property taxes? Like, if you have all these different pieces of ownership, couldn't we at least regulate it and say, we don't care, one person is on the hook for the property tax. It's just like you would have one person on the lease or something, and they're responsible if they.
Yeah, so that's how we do it.
Okay.
The managing entity is responsible under our statute for the tax. And then that entity goes and collects the portions from the individual timeshare estate owners.
Okay, I just can't
But
see
what
how
if they
that's not
don't?
taxed as that property.
What happens then?
Real.
What if they don't, or they are unable to collect the full amount? Because let's say of
Then
the
they're on the hook.
50 owners, 2 of them don't pay, what happens?
The state is going to be concerned with getting the money from the managing entity.
All right,
It's the
and
easy
They
answer.
have to get it from these.
So they'll need to pay up.
If it's the family model and someone doesn't pay, they don't get invited to Thanksgiving. And the person whose name is on the deed pays the tax.
But then, okay, let's go back to this 6-person house where a bunch of people own it, but one person's responsible for the taxes. I don't know that the average person could say, well, none of us really owe anything because we all own it a little bit and that's not worth anything. So why would we let a business do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's not what's happening. I'm
Yeah,
sorry. Children
okay.
tax-
Yeah.
The managing entity is responsible for paying the property tax. That's nobody's, this conversation is not about them not paying the property tax. It's
Okay.
about what that value is based on. There isn't some problem that they're not paying their property taxes and we're having an issue with the managing entity not make, they have to make.
But they were paying a much lower property tax than a Vermonter where a lot of people own a house.
Not
Like a
necessarily.
trust.
Not
Based on the
Okay.
way the valuation works, I would say typically they're paying more because these
Oh.
timeshare estates associated with the units,
Okay,
that's where our value is coming from.
okay.
It's gonna be worth more altogether than if it were, say, just a condo.
Okay, so even if everybody's value isn't great, they collectively, they might still be paying more annual property tax for a timeshare.
I mean, that's like typically what you would expect because of the way that the value is determined. But the circumstances here apparently are that the market has bottomed out. People aren't interested in buying timeshares. And so the value has gone way down. And so at least this new market
Reality,
change
okay.
has made them worth less. But typically, as long as there's like equal market demand for, say, a condo versus a timeshare, you're going to get more income from a timeshare. The estates are going to be worth more altogether than the condo. So just everything else being equal, the timeshare should be worth more. We should get more property tax from that. But
Because
I've
timeshares
never seen
are
it
not
happen.
market,
And it's
market
probably
has
not
changed,
situation
and
of the folks
until
who came before us.
it gets bought up by one of these new things, or everybody in there decides to walk away and it gets sold as a condo, or converted to another use by the owner of the resort, actually. I think it would default to them, then, and he converts it to another use, like a rental condo, then we will,
it will be valued differently.
yeah, be valued differently.
It's, we're talking about theory of what we think may be happening someplace, and we're not talking about facts. I'd love to see some data that talks about timeshares in Vermont. Are they being properly taxed or not? Is this a local problem in Smuggler's Notch, or is this a widespread topic affecting timeshares throughout the state that demands a holistic solution instead of
We
what we're
got
talking about? I don't have enough
yeah,
facts.
last year, Mount Snow comes to mind. It was the lister in Lamoille County, who
Yeah.
was the former head of the Listers Association, who felt very strongly that the court was wrong and it should be valued for the value of the building if they sold it as a condo. They lost in court. Depending on how the towns valued those, some towns, and there was an effort by at least one person, the testimony was, to go around and say to owners of these timeshares, geez, look at the sales on stuff, and you're being valued at 200,000, and the last 3 units here only sold for 2,000, and 3 have been abandoned. And so they appealed the assessment and they won. And we fixed the issue. I don't even remember what we did, but it was a deterrent. The town had to pay back all those taxes if they lost their appeal of the court decision. So, but the value, as long as the condos are selling, or the timeshares are selling, isn't a problem. The problem was there wasn't a market for them. And they were, and it just, because there's can be up to 52 owners. And I think 80% of them had to agree. I mean, you couldn't just say, we're gonna sell this as a condo. You had to get everybody else that owned an interest in this property to agree to sell it, at which point I assume it would be valued as a property, as a one entity property, a condo. But we probably, does property valuation follow how many timeshares we have and what's happening to them, or you have enough following what's happening to housing prices?
Right. Jill Remick, Tax Department. I wonder if last year when we came in, I do feel like there were some property transfer tax return data that we were able to look at.
Might
But
be.
I don't know that timeshare, it's not a category on the grand list or anything like that. And we don't really see that there's a problem here that needs to be solved. It's kind of shaking itself out, because if these corporations are sort of buying out people with their timeshares and turning them into rentals or employee housing or whatever, then it's going to get picked up elsewhere. So it's kind of shaking out right now. But
I think that's the conclusion we came to, is that it's, by the time we found a solution, the problem will be gone.
and I'm sorry, I have to go to testify at Ways and Means.
Oh, you gotta,
Sorry,
by all
I hate
means.
to do this to Corinne. Thank you, sorry.
Last year, did we provide the town with any relief? Because, we were talking at the same time about the bill that wound up affecting a couple other towns. I know we got some relief in, for one of the towns in my district, Sheldon, for example. And I thought it was all wrapped up in when we reported a single bill. Does that ring a bell at all?
We did something that gave towns assistance at appraising unique,
It was
difficult
no, it was
properties.
appeals. It was the appeals
Oh, the
angle.
appeals,
It was the
yes.
appeals angle.
We gave,
Yeah, that was it.
we gave some money to the towns for appeals because the town was less likely to appeal than the school district, because they got less of a proportion and the school tax lost out.
And we also talked about, we didn't want to, in effect, discourage towns from appealing
Right.
because of the notion that they might get hit. And so we increased the amount of the funds statewide. That if you
That's
lost
right,
an
there was a
appeal,
fund to
exactly.
appeal, that's what
It
we
was set
did.
originally at $100,000 statewide. And no matter what you lost, you had to go to this fund. And if you lost a fair amount of money, we could lose $100,000 easily between the tax bill and the legal bill. And we raised that to $1 million. That's what
Yeah.
we did.
That's what we did. I
Yeah,
knew we
and I just-
had done something
yeah,
to
just came back.
help the towns fight what they felt was, I mean, Cambridge is a small town. And you've got resorts being bought up by national and international corporations. So, yeah, we did do something to help the towns. But I think trying to figure out a way to fix the timeshare issue right now, that it did seem to be shaking itself out.
I'm just concerned, is it shaking itself out? Or is this a situation in which it's basically the folks who bought it, and then somebody else, the corporations, are going to be using them as rental properties that have no basis in value, no value. And so essentially, they get a resort for next to nothing that they continue to rent out for
That might
profit
be
over a long period of
something,
time.
yeah, that might be something that property valuation could look at. Take a look at, I think it's Wyndham Resorts, that they're a national,
RSG, I think it's the big one too.
yeah, and just check on when they buy out these units, and they're buying out timeshares, and they're buying them at a low price. What are they paying? I mean, it may turn out they're not, but no, once they buy them,
They wouldn't be valued as timeshares anymore.
no, they'd be valued as a resort as a whole, as
Oh, wait a
they,
minute, if they're buying the individual timeshare owners share, which is what they're doing. And then those properties are being rented out within the larger timeshare building. And so the question is, what's the value of that that's been sold to an investor as a for-profit rental unit, as opposed to a timeshare that in effect would be an owner-occupied unit? And how you separate the two, I don't think we have a mechanism to do that.
Yeah, that gets complicated. I mean, like things that come to my mind are if they're buying up the timeshare estate interests, then it technically is still a timeshare, so it would probably be valued as a timeshare. But if those timeshares are then, those units are being used for short-term rentals essentially after that, then meals and rooms tax should apply. And that should be collected. But the property value, at least in the short term, would probably still be considered a timeshare and be valued that way.
And, yeah, for at least a year, but then I would think you might be going to an income-based appraisal. Because if they own 5 of them on the same smuggler's resort, then you're renting them out as a short-term rental, then that's got to increase the property value.
So I think like all of these complicated scenarios that we're talking about are a good, like show that I think we actually our law as far as property valuations in a good place, because it says get the fair market value, and then the assessing officials do that. If we were to change it to try to tell the assessing officials to do a certain thing one way or another for value, you see all these different scenarios come up where you could have an inequitable situation. But we're not going to get a one-size-fits-all approach that we would put in the statute.
Well, that was the question though that I kind of asked quite a while ago is, we really know what the problem is. Do we know if we have a big problem or a tiny problem?
So I think Jill would say that, because she's in communication with the district advisors who talk to listers all the time, they're not seeing a problem. The listers seem to like the way things are. The district advisors, and I've spoken with them, I know that they like the fair market value approach where there's flexibility. Usually it's going to be some sort of market study that's done, but income approach was mentioned before, and sometimes with a certain situation that would make more sense for some units or something. So that's kind of where we are now. And the listers, the district advisors, as far as I know, they like that a lot, and they think it's working.
Who wants us to look at this?
Okay. It came to us, I think Tom Vickery and the village of Cambridge were the ones that had hit. And I think, again, it didn't seem that it was fair that Cambridge was absorbing the loss of, but if you have a resort or a business in town, it closes. And I thought we had a 3-year revolving so that you didn't get hit because you had one big increase or one big loss in a year. We phase some things in and out over 3 years because we have had times where things have gotten volatile. But the big concern was they didn't feel that there was enough money in the reserves. Senator Brock has helped me to remember that they could afford to appeal it, because if they lost, there wasn't money there to cover their losses. And so we did increase the amount, which gave them more ability to fight, an appraisal or a
Loss in their
loss of value. So and I have not heard another complaint we asked to have the property valuation look at what other states did, because you say, well, we can't be the only ones to do that. It's looking at this, but they're saying other state laws are pretty much what ours are, with few little twigs here and there. Senator Meadow.
A decade or so ago, I had a couple of constituents, 2 different families came to me and asked me to introduce a bill to allow them to get out of their timeshare. They had, this was in Stowe, where they had put a thing on a bulletin board saying, timeshare for sale, $1 or something like that. And I put the bill in, and who shows up in this? Yes, to testify, Chuck Storr, who had been notified by someone from Florida. And came in, lobbyist, I don't remember what he said, but I eventually had 2 families that asked me to introduce the bill, and said, don't worry about it anymore, it's okay, you don't have to. push the bill.
Something.
So they were made, those two families were made happy by someone who I don't know who they were. So happy that they came and said, you don't need to push that bill anymore as far as we're concerned. And I think it just ended up being on the wall.
Timeshares.
Disappeared.
I was up having some x-rays at the hospital, and the little technician is telling me, oh, she bought a bunch of timeshares. She has one in, it may have been Florida, but she had another one in Hawaii. I'll never get to go there. It costs too much to fly to Hawaii, but it sounded like such a good idea. So maybe she's renting it out, but it did. I mean, it sounded like, you know, for X amount of money, you could go to Hawaii for a week or 2 weeks every year. And if you didn't figure in what it was going to cost you to fly to Hawaii or buy food in Hawaii, it sounded good. And a lot of people got in it. But what's happened is those folks are aging out. Their knees don't ski every February. There, you know, it used to be a great family vacation, February vacation, you know, you came up, the family skied, and it was cheaper than staying in a hotel. But then you wanted to get out. And everybody's kids had grown up about the same time, and they all wanted to get out. And nobody else wanted to buy it. And getting out of it's been an issue for years, getting out, you know, how do I get out of this contract?
Get something to reduce the bill to
Well,
change the law.
maybe
They
two that buy out.
They let you out.
Yeah, they wanted out and they're gonna lose so, and now they're lucky they got out then. Because these folks are just walking away because they're, you know, you assess the taxes and the fees and the maintenance and everything else, and it's a significant bill. And it's more than, it's turning over.
Several minutes ago, I made a point that I still think I'm right about, but I chose my words in the interest of glibness rather than clarity. So when I said, if the court goes against you, that's what lawyers are for, and you find the loopholes. What I would like to seriously say is that legal decisions are very precise and sometimes nuanced. And in fact, it may be that there are ways to do what you want to do that are completely legal, depending
Oh, yeah.
on exactly how you parse the decision. That's,
And I think that's what we did. We allowed the towns. We expanded the pool of money so there was enough money there so the town could hire a real estate lawyer. You know, not the guy that's volunteered to be the town attorney for the last 50 years and appeal the court decision. And that was, they felt they had no viable recourse. They felt that this was unjust and that they had no viable recourse to appeal it. So we did give them that.
presuming that there is a problem, and I get it that there may not be a problem at all. But if there is, I mean, if you think about it, we have a special law for the purpose of assessing the value of agricultural land based on its current use
Yes.
rather than the actual value of the land. We value agricultural land at a lot less than it's worth because we value it at how it's used. And it seems to me that this is actually a current use. You're saying this property is worth less than it's actually worth because of how it's being used.
But it is,
So we already have legal control over that question. We could,
no, you gotta have 30 acres to be.
no, but the fact that the legislature passed,
Yeah, but
law
I think the decision was it might be using a sledgehammer to kill a fly on this one, that it wasn't a big enough issue. It was resolving itself, and we have bigger issues
I
in this
guess my
state.
question still is it small use? I don't really know whether it is or not. We saw the folks from Will County who came to us with a problem, but we know that there are large concentrations of timeshares in a variety of places throughout the state. And I don't know whether there's a problem there or not. And I think it's just something that's just worth inquiry to find out, do we have a larger problem than we recognize? And do we have timeshare owners, for example, who are affected by it because simply haven't come forward?
Okay,
They told us about it.
Kirby said they were in touch with their regional folks and
I
they
heard that.
didn't see an issue,
But there are a
but
lot of people who get poked that don't screen,
true.
and we don't know about. It's not a big deal to, make a few phone calls, a few inquiries to towns that have timeshares, places like Killington and, some of the ski area towns, and just ask a question or two.
I think Mount Snow was one that
Yeah.
mentioned has got hit with a lawsuit
I-
and lost.
Generally, it's probably a good idea for those assessing officials to be in touch with one another. Some are
Yeah.
using an approach that's working and that's getting higher value. So, because that's my suspicion in this, is maybe the approaches to getting at value in some of the towns, if they're extremely low, maybe there's something they could do differently. Because it's supposed to be fair market value, it's supposed to be going to the use value point.
Yeah.
This is not supposed to be about use value at all, and my understanding of how it's working in Vermont is there's not any sort of artificial depreciation of value. I mean, you're supposed to get at the full fair market value of these properties. And my understanding is that's how it should be working in practice. But each town has its own assessing officials and they're gonna do things a little differently, and from town to town, maybe things are done differently, and from town to town, maybe there is more tax revenue being generated from these. That's just like the human element for inconsistency. That'd be true for agricultural land if we didn't have permit use.
Yeah.
We could ask the Listers Association to come in, but no, and we did not. This was a report we asked for, and the report is back. That's what we've got. So if we want to go further, we could probably ask the Listers to come in. They were in last year. And we could see if we could find out what the other disadvantaged towns were. Okay.
Yes, Mark.
I haven't heard any more from Cambridge, and my daughter's mother-in-law was the town clerk there. I did get reminded that there was an issue.
I don't know if this is like a different point or a different question necessarily, but it just seems to me that if this market shifts and people get bought out at some very low level of this current arrangement, and the owning entity that buys them out very low is able to flip this into some very high value new scheme, we should be able to extract money from them at that point.
Yeah.
That's all,
Yeah.
like it's
We will.
gonna become the next moneymaker, and these people will have been shorted a great deal, and someone's gonna make a ton of money off of that. And I don't want to penalize the people getting shorted, but it's somehow tax the people who are about to turn this into the
I
next
think, yeah,
big thing.
I mean, buying real estate is a risk. There were a lot of people that bought condos and homes in Florida that were increasing in value at 3% a month. I've had realtors talk about the cab drivers saying, oh, you're going to the realtors convention and this was Las Vegas. Oh, I just bought my third condo. And she's saying, I hope you can afford to make the payments. And when the market crashed, I mean, real estate investment is a risk, like buying stocks. And I don't think the state of Vermont can make you whole because
No.
your risk didn't work out. There's a whole lot of people, well, I can remember being told I could buy $1 million condo in one of my ski towns for $50,000 after the crash.
Right.
So, I mean,
But if
somebody lost money.
someone's gonna buy low and sell high, I mean, if they go to 6 people and pay them $2,000 and what they end up with is a ski property,
Yes,
then that
then it will get,
somehow we have to.
it will get,
From
it
that
will
person.
get appraised at its use, and
Yeah.
it's now being used as a short-term rental resort. And we will get rooms and meals if meals are included in that. Or if they go out to buy it, we'll get rooms tax. I mean, we can take a look at it, but we might, I think probably more important is to see what this new
Yes.
thing is and make sure that it's being fully assessed at its value. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for looking at that. Committee, yes, since we've got time. Issues you would like to take up, I'm still waiting for bills, and this is a bigger void than we've had. But I thought I'd run through, we take a short look at the cloud tax, and I now know which lobbyist represents the industry. So we'll get them in just in the thought that we might need to raise money. It's not my intent to raise any, but given the big ticket items floating around, I'd rather know what the possibilities are now than childcare is going to get dealt with outside of here, but we might start all of them. We might start taking some testimony on that, on what the different bills are, the different levers, how much money each, there were suggestions, none of which I think struck me or anybody else as wonderful, like taxing medical services. I think that got taken out. But there is a payroll tax has been suggested. And so I would see us looking at how could we put together, we have, I think, a 32 million child tax credit that we could repurpose. The thought was it would help people pay for childcare. There is concern about a payroll tax on low wage employees. There's concern about a payroll tax on low profit employers. But we've got some employers that have come in and said it's really good. I don't know about anybody else, but I was not pleased to see an ad on CBS Evening News from Building Bright Futures. I can't afford to put ads as a CBS Evening News. And it was a Vermont ad.
Okay.
Not a really flashy one, but it was an ad saying that legislators are looking at this. So we can take a look at that.
While we're in that vein,
Yeah,
the conversation feels similar about paid family leave.
yes,
Do you want to do both at the same time? They're talking about the same pots of.
they are, and it's still ongoing. If we're gonna try and do both or either, but we can also get some numbers.
Conversation though also ought to include the governor's option of a
Yeah.
voluntary family leave and looking at the numbers associated with both and what the effect would be from either solution.
Sure.
Something tells me the tax commissioner will bring that up. I don't know if the governor had any new tax proposals.
No, there were no new taxes.
Other than doing away with the military.
Yeah, well, the military piece was one,
Yes.
was a tax exemption. and again, I will bring it up again for whatever use, with that notion of, given our demographic crisis, that's one additional thing that we are spending money right now to recruit people to come to Vermont. And as we look at doing so, and we're also talking about diversity. The military, 40% of people who leave the military are BIPOC. That's just one issue right there. But beyond that, there are critical skills that we are desperately short of, that military retirees have 20 years of work left to do. And we are finding that military retirees, even from our National Guard, are leaving Vermont because of the tax policy.
If I can find a way to leave out the 6-star generals who have been working for the military industrial complex for 10 years and accrue 6 figures, I'm not interested in forgiving theirs and still taxing people living on their social
Well,
security.
you can tax, we certainly have a graduated income tax schedule, which we've applied to everybody else, and we can certainly apply it to them.
We did last
And we
time.
do.
Yeah, we did last time. So I know that one is gonna keep coming back. Other issues, we're gonna have to look at funding the clean heat standard, but I don't think that's quite ready, right?
Wait for the governor's plan.
You're gonna wait.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things is our responsibility of oversight of the Public Utilities Commission. I saw, in fact, when I came in this afternoon, the people from
ISO and I stood up
ISO.
ISO and Green Mountain
Yeah,
Power today because I got caught up in the
Yeah.
pro tem's
Well, because
office.
the question that is always, it ought to be on our mind, when we talk about clean heat standard, or for that matter, anything else that talks about electrification, is where's our electricity coming from? And
Yeah.
are there plans in place to deliver the electricity that we need to be able to do these conversions?
So
So
I think-
no good, short answer is no adjustments are necessary for 10 years. They're-
Now, why do we have to
Okay.
not charge our cars in the summertime during certain days of the week because there isn't enough power?
Okay, so we will look at electricity
I mean, I just don't
availability,
believe that.
how much we'll need to grow, how much we'll need to put in. We will look, I will ask the Public Service Department or maybe some of the industry people about supply chain, and while we're setting timeframes, I tried to get a heat pump last fall, and was told call us back in March. So like childcare and other things, we have workforce, we have supply issues. And we should take a look at that.
So I have things on my list, and since I'm new to this committee, it's unclear to me how much I should be doing research on my own, as opposed to if this committee wants to take on more testimony and preparation.
Oh, we will, whatever you do, we will redo.
Okay. I heard about online sports betting. There was a report, and I don't know if that's part of the governor's proposal or not, but
Okay, that usually goes through economic
Yeah, that's-
development,
great.
then it may come here, but that would start, because.
I will say, yeah, I mean, if it's helpful, so far the agreement is that the House takes that up first. And then it comes to Senate Economic Development after crossover, and there's just no guarantee it makes it over from the House, so we might not want to look at it prematurely. I do feel more momentum this year, and it is $3 to $4 million we're talking about, but yeah.
I thought it was big money.
It's not, glad I said that out loud, because it's,
Yeah,
it fills some kind of little gap,
That does help.
but probably, I was thinking that it's probably not good to like spend too much time on it before we.
So I just have another short list. Sugary sweetened beverage tax, that was presented in the RAND report, and I heard rumblings from last session. So if I just need to do my own
10 years
research.
of rumblings.
Yeah, so
That was yours, right?
What's that?
Sugars beverage.
No,
It's a joke.
Oh, I was like, I doubt it.
Thank you.
I need to
That,
know more. whether
well,
it's-
we have, it's one of those, we've got candy too. The number in the Rand report, because that struck me, was a 15%, like an excise tax out of the city of Philadelphia. We couldn't do a sales tax because we belong to the, what is it?
Streamline sales
Streamlines, I keep wanting to say super sales tax, streamline sales tax, which says everything, the sales tax is the sales tax in Vermont, and our definitions of what's taxed has to be the same. So we'd have to go by their standard of sweetened beverage, and we could do 5% or 6, we're at 6. Same with candy, and then the grocers will come in and tell you, is a yogurt covered raisin or chocolate covered raisin candy? Because there gets to be all these exceptions.
So they're not worth looking at, is what you're saying?
We
Interrupt Jim
look
here.
at it.
Bagels.
It's one of those things, if we really need money, we'll look. But for the amount it raises, it's never been worth the trouble.
Can I raise 3 more things?
Yeah,
All right, so in Senate Transportation, this has come up a few times, just yesterday and also last session. And I don't know if finance necessarily plays a role or not, but I understand that during Governor Scott's 6 years, we have not had a fee bill, we haven't raised fees. Is that a
Yes.
finance discussion? Is that
Yes.
happening? Okay. 'Cause I
and
think we
that
should
is
look at
happening in Ways and Means. They have received, the rep that was a senator for a while.
The fee queen.
And she always did the fee bill. I've negotiated the fee bill with her for years, and she's a Republican. So they are looking at trying to figure out how much general fund has been used to replace. The idea with fees is only a few people, or some people use these, and therefore those people, it's pretty clear for Act 250 permits. The place it hits most people is motor vehicles. Because it's heavily personnel, and we've done pay increases over the last 6 years, and somewhere that, so they're looking at it, and I anticipate something will come.
Last 2.
Yes.
I just want to echo Senator Brock. I had, Jimmy has, Senator Hinsdale, I have the Rochester National Guard in our district, as well as Eaton Firing Range. And I talked to a lot of military professionals that literally, and they're not 6-star generals, and they
Oh,
are
no.
looking at leaving the state just to save money when they retire. If we're out of step with the rest of the country, I fully support
No.
getting in step, but some
We
graduated.
Are
so-
out of step.
Yeah.
The other states, and I had the tax commissioner admit this, those pension exceptions went in the late 40s, early 50s. Showed our respect for the boys who had been fighting, okay. Vermont did a reduction on your property value. Those other states didn't have to pay up for 20 years. We paid up immediately. So it's not that Vermont didn't do anything. I would assume that there was some negotiation where the veterans said, we would like this. Act 60, which got it on your income, actually made it better not to use that benefit. And Senator McDonald did a lot of work with local veterans working through that.
Yeah.
But we could, if, and as somebody's, I think it was Senator Kitchell said, if we could do it as a work credit, I mean, if you actually came here and worked.
Help to pay your moving fees like you do first.
Well, I mean, it's very much like we are doing right now in terms of trying to attract people to our workforce.
So we could
As a Democrat, that would make sense.
something for those who actually came here and worked. I still have a hard time with our police and our firefighters retire early or can, and we aren't doing anything for them. And I'm concerned that if we do military, the teachers, the fire, the police, and the state employees will be in here.
That's again something though that we had discussed before, and
Yeah.
remember the I had 2 interns working from UVM last year, and one of the things I tasked them to do was to go research that issue through NCSL and others, and they did. And of the 10 states that have adopted this most recently, we went back and looked at them as to whether or not there was a follow-on with other first responders, and there was not. It didn't
Well,
happen.
no, because they went in 1944.
Well, again, no, those other states didn't go in 1940. We've had 10, 12, or more states within the past 10 years have adopted this. Because that's why we're now up to 47 states that have, a broad exemption. And many of those are in recent years, they're not in the 1940s.
Until they are 65 years old. And while they are able to work, they are not paying on, if it's a married couple, up to $90,000 worth of their pension. So there is an exemption for the folks that are likely to come here.
So I'm just putting these on the table because I hope that we're going to spend time on it during the session. I have some counterpoints on how
Yeah.
military is different than police and fire, and I've talked, but that's for the discussion later. The last one, just so that you're all not surprised, I just put in a bill on the salt tax exemption. I
Yep.
was really inspired by Senator Pearson's remarks at the end of the last session, and then Senator Sorokin as well. I know a lot more information has come out since those discussions over the summer, and I think I also spoke with the tax commissioner. It seems to make a lot of sense.
If
so
the
I'm
tax
hoping that will take some
commissioner
time.
is ready to
Yeah.
put details, when he came in here last year, it was like, oh, well, they hadn't thought it through. They didn't have a solid proposal. And it then ended up being stuck on a variety of economic development bills, which didn't set well with the Ways and Means Committee, because that's where the bills were at that point.
That was the impression I got from it. but
Yeah.
I feel the ducks are now in a row, and so it makes sense. to look
That
at.
one we can look at. I'd like to be able to also help those folks that are just getting an income and don't own a company, because the company owners were also the ones that benefited the most from the tax cuts. It's the folks that are up there working, because there were all kinds of benefits for businesses. I thought about having my antique business turned into an LLC.
Antique business?
Hmm?
I didn't know. you
Well,
had an antique
and
business.
for the next 3 days, then the shop is yours. It's not my shop, I rent space, but I've had it for 20 years.
The last thing I'll say is, if you all have readings you want me to do on these things, I welcome your suggestions, so we're not covering ground.
Now, if you have some witnesses you want in, we can do that. And do you know, I guess we'd have joint fiscal in on family leave to talk about.
Yes, Pat Titterton.
Okay, so we'll get him in. Since I also stood up Jill today to do agenda planning, we're gonna do it now. So I thought I'd get some of that down.
We can mention our other bill.
Local option tax. I'm told I might go to GovOps, but happy to. If you want to.
Oh, yeah.
choose it.
It came here last biennium straight away.
They usually, some of them start, it's up to the secretary. What local option tax?
Do you want to speak to Senator Rosendale?
I think you all have seen it before, but just not requiring each community to come in to get approval for the local
Yeah.
option tax.
They still have to get voter approval, right?
Yes.
But they just don't have to go to the
They
legislature.
don't have,
Yeah.
they don't have to get legislative prior, thank you. I came up here at least twice with the Montpelier and did not even get heard.
Right, exactly.
Couldn't
Get to
get
that.
taken
Yeah.
up.
And our local communities have less money now and more to do than probably.
Okay.
One
That
other
would-
issue, and this is perhaps a minor issue, and it relates to the tax department. I've spoken to the commissioner about it, and he's thinking more about it. The issue is, when there's a mistake made and a consumer is overcharged in sales tax, for example, there is no effective mechanism for that consumer to get repaid,
Oh.
even if the department becomes aware of the issue. The obligation is for the company or entity that made the overpayment to deal with it, but there's no mechanism for that to happen. And this happened in the case that I'm familiar with Tractor Supply.
Mhm.
And Tractor Supply has a store that is located in Swanton, just across the town line. They charge customers 7% sales tax because St. Albans Town, which is next door, and also their mailing address did so. They were notified by consumers several years ago of this problem, and they failed to correct it.
So, or the extra, does St. Albans have a local option?
St. Albans had a local option.
Okay, so it's the
Swanton did not.
1% local
So, yeah,
option.
they were over collecting by 1%. And so a constituent came to me last year, identified the problem. I wrote a letter to the tax commissioner, giving him the details, and also the fact that they apparently had been doing this for something like 7 years. If I take the average amount of sales of the Tractor Supply store and multiply it by the number of years and multiply it by 1%, our local taxpayers have been overcharged by $500,000.
Just that.
The customers in the store.
That's what the store.
But
That
the-
one, that's what that 1% represents.
And I wonder, that sounds like something, because knowing who bought what when
Yeah,
is.
I mean, you go in and
unless
buy
you get a
something for-
charge card.
Yeah, if you buy a tractor, you probably have a receipt for the sales tax on it. But if you buy, some hedge clippers and a bag of seed, you don't.
You don't even ask. So, and they don't keep a record. If you give them a $50 bill, you just
And of course, the
walk out.
problem is that when you are dealing with Tractor Supply, well, the customer doesn't have any way of even knowing that the overcharge occurred because the tax department has privacy requirements that prevent them from saying that.
Okay, so we
So-
need to figure out
A mechanism.
a mechanism. I don't know that we could ever get it back to everyone.
Well, we could get it back
Maybe
to
we
a
could-
common source for public good. if
Well,
nothing
I'm
else.
just thinking, for some reason, I'm getting 20 cents off on gas at Cumberland Farms.
Mhm.
All the other, I went through New Hampshire and Maine, they're only doing the 10%. That's if you get the direct withdrawal card because they're not paying the credit card fees. All right. But I'm saying, so was there a settlement? How come I'm suddenly getting 20 cents off? And maybe you could do something where they would have a 1% off or only charge 5% sales tax or do something like that. And that would be something, I don't know that it would take a law, just take the tax department talking about it.
Well, the tax department doesn't have the ability to do it at this point. They've
No,
got,
but they might be able, if they refund the money, they could refund the money and require that Tractor Supply do this.
right now,
Figure out
there's in terms of dollars.
6
I don't
weeks or
even know
6 months.
if Tractor Supply actually paid the tax department the money in the first place. Or
Oh.
simply overcharged the customer. We
Well,
have no
then
way of
that's
finding
tax
out.
fraud.
They collect any money they collect in sales taxes that they weren't obliged to collect. Has to be remitted, they can't keep.
Right, but the question is, all right. It's not a good faith mistake. Normally, you just refund it to the taxpayer. I overpay, I get it back. But this probably has 200 or 2,000 taxpayers that there is no list of.
Right.
And so you just give it back to the company, say, where you go. You
The
give
tax
it
department
back.
says they're obligated, the company is obligated to refund stuff to the customer, but there's no mechanism they have to determine if that in fact is
Right.
occurred.
And there's no mechanism probably for Tractor Supply to determine. I mean, 7 years. They probably destroyed some of those tax records. So that, maybe we could just have it donated to charity.
So in your case, when you wanted to go to the municipality that it should have gone to, had there been a local
Well,
option
that's,
tax?
that's
Yeah.
assuming
All
that,
right, that would also work.
that's assuming that's the case, but what they did is they charged the local option, they were in Swanton, but the customers are from, all over Franklin County.
But even,
But they're in Swanton, so Swanton doesn't have the tax, so they shouldn't have charged the tax.
Correct.
Can I assume that, like Marshfield, the Swanton town line is at some point very close? Like, you can, 1 block from downtown Plainfield during Marshfield,
Right.
even though to get to the town is 15 miles up the road.
That's exactly right.
It's, some Vermont towns are a little strange and you would never really realize what town you're in. The Barry Fish and Game Club is in Berlin. Out that side of Montpelier, nowhere near the, not even town center of Berlin.
I'm always hesitant to use the time of such esteemed
Yes.
individuals, but it seems like we're a relaxed state where we can have these conversations. I
Yes.
would add to that last piece that I found that if 7% sales tax is charged at Lowe's in South Burlington, and then you return something at the Lowe's in Essex, which doesn't have it, they only return you the 6%, and that 1% gets lost in the
Ether,
ether, yeah. But I don't know if that's worth reading
That's-
into, so.
that's, yeah, that's.
Or you had to drive to get to another one.
Yeah, because they didn't, that money stayed in that and got remitted to that town. It never went to Lowe's corporate office, who is actually refunding you the cost of them.
And, you know, we think about these things, and, you know, hey, it's only a penny, it's not a big deal, and it's an exception. But then, you know, just in the tractor supply thing, you multiply it out, there's a lot of money
It's a
involved.
lot of money.
It adds up.
Okay, penny here, penny there.
Do prescription drug pricing issues start in health and welfare usually before they come here?
They've been all over the place.
Okay.
Because they impact the cost of health insurance, we've done a lot of work on it.
Okay.
Not for a number of years, but there were a couple years where that's about all we did.
I have a redraft and I want to say it was Cheryl Hooker's bill on a prescription drug pricing board. And there's been some progress made in other states on
Okay,
standardizing prescription drug prices.
right. That would probably start.
Yeah.
We haven't tried that one, but we only have one distributor, and it is Interstate Commerce. And it gets very complicated very fast, and that's what I had a fit about last year with the, and went against all my principles on the, $30,000 a pill drugs, those really high-end ones. While the insurance companies had a prescription benefit, and it only went through, like 5 pharmacies, because they controlled
Not to be used.
how many outlets there were, they got a good deal on it, which gets reflected in your insurance price. We open it up to everybody. It's more convenient, but the special price goes away. So the result is I can buy it at my local pharmacy, and the local pharmacist will make a tiny little, probably $5 on that $30,000 prescription. But the bill to the insurance company, and it'll come back on my insurance costs. And prescription drugs are one of the 2 big drivers of healthcare. The others are hospital costs, and while they're going up and they're driving health insurance, our rural hospitals are on very shaky financial legs. They're cutting out maternity because there aren't enough babies to cover the cost of having an OB/GYN on staff at night, or an OB/GYN nurse or midwife. So you gotta drive, if you're in Springfield, you gotta drive to Brattleboro tonight, right now. You'll appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of issues going on, but if anybody's making money, it's pharmaceutical companies. Well, you were here when we did pharmaceuticals, weren't you?
I think so.
Cheryl was the chair,
I was never here with Cheryl.
Okay, well, then I took over when Cheryl went to the Legislators
Yeah.
Association to control the price of prescription drugs.
Oh,
I had a lot of luck with
I
that.
mean, it's not that we have not tried.
If you're polling the committee on what we're interested in, it's, three of us here are, spend our mornings on the Natural Resources Energy
Yes.
Committee. But this committee has jurisdiction over utilities.
Yes.
So this committee will be dealing, I presume, with.
If you're gonna regulate utilities, we will.
Well, there are gonna be implications, whether,
Now, keep talking to us.
yeah.
Can I piggyback on that?
Mhm.
So, City of Burlington, recently, the city council just passed a resolution to send it to me, and I believe you go to Senator Hinsdale, asking us to advance, and I mentioned this the other day, a public transit financing charge, to pay for public transit throughout the state using the public utility fee. I'm not saying I support or decline it, but I'd like to understand, it doesn't quite make sense. It's
But
not this
public
rational
transit
sense.
isn't a utility.
I agree. So, but it would be useful to understand some of the counterpoints as to why that isn't
Okay.
necessary.
Because I said, well, yeah, who would pay it? The
Everybody.
riders, everybody. And it's a tax.
Who's gonna see Aldo reports, so if you want to have him in, he's gonna come into transportation, but it's. a
Yeah,
finance
I
thing.
mean, when he's here, let me know when he's here, and we'll get him on. If it's got anything to do with a tax or a fee. Because we do need to do utilities, or public transit.
not as a total departure, but I've always been interested in the E911 issue since I was on Ways and Means as like a pays for public goods. If your citizens use it, but your town doesn't pay for it, that just strikes me as fairness issues.
That's because you're from the big city.
Well, I guess we have our own, but
You have a police department too. Actually, most of the towns around you probably do if you're
we'll use
here.
Williston.
They don't, and they don't have a full-time, and you're paying for full-time, and that's all the arguments for the local option tax. Unless Senator McDonald wants to, have to show his ID when he has a heart attack on the streets of Montpelier to decide if my fire and police are gonna pick him up, then they're using the facilities here, they're using, you guys are from big cities, that's the argument. There used to be 50,000 people a day in the city of Montpelier on a base of 8,208. The population has gone down, and I think the number of state employees here every day is definitely down, but it's still a large number of people on a very small population base, and it's expensive, and Rutland will tell you, and St. Albans, same kind of thing.
I think you fix the local ones.
Yes, we've gotten that permission.
Senator Ron Hinsdale's point, a person in the law enforcement community in Vermont in a leadership position, won't name the name, but he did tell me that we absolutely should look under the hood of that E911 fee and how much it compares to other states. And a lot of with our discussions about regional dispatch, if not state dispatch, could be solved through coordinated or considered adjustments to that funding source.
That, yes, E911 has come out of the fee that goes on your phone bill. And we've paid for emergency phone service, the whatever it is for the hearing impaired, where you can type E911.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah, but that's how we've been funding broadband, with whatever was left out of that. I think it's a 3% charge. But no, we have known for a while that that is because people aren't getting phone lines anymore. That,
Called the universal service fee.
yeah, universal service fee, that is not enough to support E911. and we lost our,
It's still just on landlines or is that
I think it's now on
everything?
everything. We, yeah, because we extended the emergency services to cell phones. It used to be just a landline. But the other one, who was our whole Mr. Bose issue, with the small cell that were hooking on phone poles and would give you cell service out in very rural areas. When they started this plan and their business plan, there was no E911 fee on it, that they just had to pay to have a carrier pick those up and broadcast them. And shortly after, before they even got started, E911 charged everyone a fee to have the services broadcast over those systems or any system. And that through this whole, if you know anyone that needs some small cell transmitters,
Okay.
we have a warehouse full. I'm thinking the state bought them, and I'm thinking maybe we could repurpose them as planters or something. Yeah, we have a lot, and that was the first time Mr. Whitaker was in here. And we really tried to find a way to get them up, but they had not paid their bills for so long that none of the carriers would touch
This was
them.
old technology.
It was outdated.
I'd just like to know how our fee, our universal
We
fee
will
compares. to other
definitely-
cities.
This is
Okay.
something that is starting right now. We just had a meeting on this. Whitaker's been raising this as an issue for quite a while now.
Yeah.
Is the whole issue of law enforcement and first responder dispatch. And then
That's
you-
what I thought I was talking
Right,
about.
and you
Sorry,
add
yes,
that
no.
to E911 is
Right.
part of that. And it, they had a sort of a commission or board or group of people, which consisted of, some of the sheriffs and law enforcement agencies and the Department of Public Safety. And they, there's $20 million was set aside to, out of COVID funds to be able to get that going. And Whitaker's raised an issue. Whitaker raises all kinds of issues, as you know. But he raised an issue, and the issue is actually a valid one, that it's a mess. There's no coordination, there's no real theory about fallback and redundancy. And the notion of a fragmented system, the way it's planned, is just very poorly planned. This is my opinion of what is the outcome of that. The governor raised an issue, though, I think it's a valid issue, that before we jump in to say, what is it we're going to do with this, we have to decide, is this a regional or local responsibility, or is it a statewide responsibility? And so I know we met, a week or so ago with Senator Kitchell, Senator Hardy, who else was it? Senator,
Wasn't me.
it was Nader Hashim and
Yeah.
myself,
Yeah.
to talk about how can we, where does the responsibility lie, and and Ruth picked it up, and so
Okay.
GovOps is going to
Yeah,
start out
GovOps
doing that.
does, we do the fees
We
to
do-
fund.
Right, then it'll come to us at some point.
That's where we
So
get.
it really needs rationalization.
Yeah,
I know from my perspective is, trying to do this regionally in a state the size of Vermont is crazy. That just makes no sense. Because then it becomes, we don't have a regional government. So who owns it? So this time you set it up and the sheriff department in this region owns it. Well, you get a new sheriff. Then what happens? Then where does it go?
It's been there for, when I first started the city government in Montpelier, which was a long, long time ago. The city and several of the surrounding towns, because Montpelier, we had a dispatch center, and hired Tim Meehan of Rice over there, to help them figure out how it should be priced and what we should do. Montpelier continued to do dispatch. Then we went to regional. The bottom line is that the state police were doing dispatch for some towns, but, and that
not
was
for others.
free.
Then some of it was free and then some of it was paid.
Paid.
It was,
But the towns, this Montpelier, Barry, were all charging because they're paying the personnel, they're dispatching to you. Well, the towns were always sure that we were offsetting the cost of our police department and not just paying for dispatch, which wasn't true, but, you know, it cost but you try, I mean, we tried to dispatch on this side of Middlesex. Well, no, they waited, they contracted with Stowe, which had to drive twice as far as Montpelier to pick up a heart attack victim. And we had trained EMTs, not fast squads. So it's been going on, how you pay for it. It gets tied in with fire police services. The state police cannot be there.
And they don't want to be.
And
That's
they
the other
don't
part of
want,
the
no,
other
they can't
issue,
do the
is they didn't want to
dispatch
do it.
and they can't get out. I mean, there's a domestic violence person, you know, who called me. Plainfield doesn't have a police department. The state police are out there. If they're at the far end of their district, it can take 45 minutes for a domestic violence, just, you know, to get any kind of action. In a real situation, Barry, Montpelier will back up. But we're paying for that service, plus we're paying for the police, the state police, and that grates on people. So it's, at some point, it's how we convince people that, yeah, you know, this is one of those services we need. We've all got to pay for it.
So can we invite in the person that knows the most about what we're collecting in this universal fee on
Oh,
our
yeah.
stones and what we're spending it on, how much we're
That's-
getting?
oh, yeah.
How we compare other
Oh, yeah,
states?
and well,
I don't
that's
even know where to start.
public utility department. And I'm not,
Service department.
public service department, that's right, PUC, yeah. June Tierney,
From the-
whoever's in her shop.
But I guess
No,
one
that's,
thing is,
that's the usual.
I would, knowing what's going on and what the president's doing, but I would be hesitant for us to jump into the middle of this now,
Oh, yeah,
since Ruth is doing it, otherwise.
Yeah.
This is where we just,
what we can do is
You know,
take a look
Oh, yeah.
at the revenues and the history of the revenues coming into public, in that fee. And we've done that several years running. We've kind of backed off since all the money came in for broadband, because that was the money we were using to subsidize for-profits to string things out where it was economically viable. But it was decimal dust. It was, you know, $10,000 a year. And no, it's not increasing as fast. I think there's a significant deficit, or there was projected for
I think it
911.
was, yeah.
Yeah. So
Should look more.
something's gotta be done apart from dispatch. I mean, something's gotta be done to fund their system. And yeah, we live in Vermont and phone lines and trees come down. And so
Snowstorms.
it's, yeah, or windstorms or anything else, so guaranteeing any kind of redundancy in service gets hard.
In the same vein of like kind of little but big issues, I've always, I don't know what this committee's conversation's been like about the local access issue where more people are switching to
Oh.
streaming services. I don't know if that's.
Yeah, oh no, they've been in, there's
Yeah.
been a study. It seems to end up, it's funding.
Okay, I mean, it's.
How much state,
Okay.
yeah, it's how much state funding goes in there, and so they came to us, we did the study.
Okay.
It went to Probst, they got some money,
Mm-hmm.
and they got some ARPA funds because they were very helpful during COVID.
Right.
But that money's going away, and yes, but that would essentially.
Okay, I always thought of it, I mean, when they first approached me, it was like, are we gonna try to ask these big streaming services to do what cable once upon a time did and fund local?
Yeah, because cable's backed out. or they want their things back.
Ours is Netflix.
I don't know, I know that,
Okay.
yes, one of the things on my list was, cable advertising, online advertising, but apparently Maryland's law has been struck down.
Oh, okay.
We are not allowed to do much of anything to cable. It's an FCC regulation. We can't tax them, we can't. And we've had trouble with voice over
Okay.
cable
Yeah.
over, yeah. We've looked at it,
Yeah,
but that one we'll see again.
okay.
I don't know, we can ask what's our ability to tax streaming services, but I have a feeling we're up against the federal.
Yeah. And I have one more. I don't wanna, name any particular business interests, but some of you also may have been approached about novel ways to get more cell phone towers built and have the state pay for the equipment while renting or leasing the tower, then the space on the tower to the different cell companies so that they don't own the infrastructure because they've been either giving up on certain areas or fighting about certain areas and then nothing happens and then we have huge cell coverage gaps. So it might be it's a Vermont-based entity that is looking to potentially fill that gap. So I just don't know where that issue goes.
I have not heard that one at all.
Okay.
If they're looking for money to do that, then it would go to a probes or institution.
Okay, I don't know, because it's cell coverage, it's like
Yeah,
an issue
but-
here, but if not,
Yeah,
because they I think they came to me as like economic development.
Yeah.
So I don't know where it is
I mean,
actually.
cell coverage, cell phones aren't a utility.
Okay, that's fair. I didn't know it was like the equipment for cell coverage. But
It's generally been put up, we have a lot of regulations around it. It would probably be worth a call to the Public Service Department
okay,
and just see what they know about it. But if it requires the state in any way buying
yeah,
cell towers or financing it, unless it would be a tax on.
right. I mean, that's good to know because
Service.
I could see it starting as an economic development issue because you can't get someone to visit your part of the state if you have no cell coverage.
Right.
It's a tourism issue. It's a,
Cell
Yeah, so-
coverage we've generally dealt with, but what
Okay.
they're talking is getting some state funding to build the towers.
right.
So it might be helpful just to
Yeah,
get their business perspective.
right.
Find
Start an
out.
economic development
Yeah.
center to approach.
Yeah, find out what they
Okay.
need,
Great.
and then
I appreciate people indulging on care, figuring it out.
I think Jill and I have enough to work with. But anything else, we will take up. Okay? Okay.
Oh, well, like, I think it got lost, but TIFs.
Tips, yes.
Yeah, I don't know if that made it on the list, but
Um,
I think we have
Which
to look at it
TIFs?
given Burlington's situation.
Burlington's situation is eternal and ongoing.
Now, I think we should understand what happens there.
Oh, well, okay, so we can, all right, so we will have the auditor's office. And this, I think it was the city treasurer that came in. Want to see two billy goats, but this was just changing dates for audits.
I'm gonna be that advocate as the chair of economic development, but, project-based TIFs has always been an issue for our committee.
Well, I'm thinking, since I sit down here, the big tips are big and are really only appropriate for big communities that have planning, zoning, and a finance department. They have to be pretty sophisticated. We may have run through all of those. And we may be able to say, okay, we're going to switch to a mini TIF and set a financial cap on it that we did. I have some concerns about small towns getting in over their heads. Right, and I think it was Joe Goldstein who did that. We said, well, we got a grant, we put in a septic system in my town, and now we can't afford to make the upgrades we need to. And I'm saying, well, I don't really want to set, if you don't have the tax base to bond to build it, are you gonna have the tax base to bond to fix it or maintain it? Because they do need staff and maintenance. But we can talk about that. Okay.
If we're gonna be doing this, then should include taking a look at Hartford.
Hartford's on the board,
More of it, that's right.
and if your town manager were in before next Friday, they would have been on the calendar today or tomorrow. So as soon as he's back, and I just checked with the two reps from Barry and was told they thought you were doing the Barry TIFs.
Okay.
So they just sent me the city manager's email, because we have a new city manager. And I am about to send him an email, he and Carol Doss, and tell her, either the reps or possibly me, then we'll get them both in here. I need to know what they want.
Right, yeah, I think I kind of asked VLCT, do they want one kind of chain reaction
Yeah.
started, so I apologize.
Yeah, so I've got that to go, and we could do one just.
Right.
I'm assuming it's all COVID related, it just threw a wrench in everybody's plans, but we'll find out. This is an extension, you can get one extension from the Pepsi board. This is a second and final extension, it's the extension of when you can incur debt. So they have to give us a good reason, because this all withholds money from, so we're planning on money not going to the ed fund for 20 years. If it's now getting closer to 30, if there's too many of these, we can get a reaction.
The Springfield, all okay, now we get that straightened out.
I haven't heard from Springfield. The only one we've done is Windsor. We did Windsor last year. Does Springfield even have a TIF?
I thought that, no, Springfield tried to get a TIF and it didn't. Was their problem.
Okay,
So I don't know if this committee has anything to say on that.
no,
We're trying to give them some brownfields money,
Yeah,
helps, that's been hard to get out the door, but we're trying.
they've used it well, what money they've gotten from the state. As well.
okay, I think that's it. And we will see what we can get in here. Okay. So thank you all. Have a safe trip. I didn't think it was supposed to snow today.
I canceled my, I was supposed to speak at St. Mike's tonight. That's not happening.
We've got welcome legislators tonight, and the Vermont Democratic Party or Senate fundraiser. No, we do it every year. We've done it for 35 years. At the Capitol Plaza, yes, that's the one with all the good food.
Yeah, very good.
Somebody else,
Well,
Local restaurants show up overload.
Oh,